we're going to talk to someone in the industry writing poems and children's books, not only a writer, but also a songwriter and an educator. We're talking about publishing difficulties, publishing rules that you might not know about, publishing shortcuts to get in there, difficulties after you've done that, ways to make your writing, your poems more smooth, homework that he gives me to help me become a better poet, and we're actually going to read one of my poems that I actually wrote yesterday. So stay tuned. This is going to be fun. Let's do it.
Welcome back to the Wax Quill Podcast. Woohoo!
Welcome, guys. I'm so glad you're here. Today, I have a very special guest. This is author, songwriter, and educator, Eric Odie. Hello, Eric. Thanks for coming.
Hi. Thanks, Esther. Nice to be here.
So I learned about you because I have this class that I'm taking about children's fiction.
Oh.
And so I needed to read some poetry, and I got this book, When You're a Pirate Dog and Other Pirate Poems, at the library. And it's hilarious. It's so good.
Thank you.
And the artwork is just amazing. It's amazing. Especially the hat with the huge flower and the flower feather.
Yep.
It's amazing. I was wondering, is it okay if I read one of these? Or is there...
Oh, yeah. No, feel free. Go right ahead.
Okay.
Do you have a pirate hat,
Esther? I wish I did.
I always tell students that they're not allowed to read a pirate poem without a pirate hat, but we can make an exception today.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm honored by the exception there. I noticed when I started reading these, I was reading them to my kids. I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I don't know how much they appreciated it, but I had a great time. And I noticed with this, you can tell that you're a songwriter because it flows so well. With a lot of the poems I write, I have someone read them and they can't quite get into the rhythm of it. But yours comes out naturally. And I don't know how you did that, but it's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I tend to, because I think I was a musician and a songwriter before I started writing poetry. And so I tend to think in music terms and songwriting terms rather than poetry terms when I'm writing poems. Like there are a lot of terms that people throw around about when it comes to meter and it comes to rhythm and how many syllables in a line, and those are all like super important and they're great terms to know. And I tend to not think about them when I'm writing. I tend to think almost more like I'm writing lyrics because that happens. And I suppose it makes the poem easier to scan. And I've got a good friend, Ken Nesbitt, who is a really well-established children's poet. And he is such a stickler for meter and for getting the rhythm right. And early on, when I was first writing more and more children's poetry, he was great about catching those and saying, you know what, this isn't working here because the emphasis on this syllable is wrong for this meter. And it was really helpful. And I still carry that with me, and it makes me spend more time than I think I naturally would, really paying attention to making sure that the meter is just spot on.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. Yeah. It becomes a bit like a puzzle though, at that point. It's sort of, that's the fun part of it is, like, I don't know if you do, for instance, like if you do crossword puzzles or you do, similar kinds of word games, and there's something about knowing that everything is falling into place where it's supposed to. And a lot of times I find that, especially with like tightly rhyming, tightly metered poems, it's sort of really satisfying when you find exactly the right pieces that are going to, that is still going to say exactly what you want it to say, but the meter is going to fall into exactly the right spot. So when you know it's right, it's right.
Are you willing to, if you have a poem and 2 lines of it, let's say there's 100 lines, but 2 lines are just not quite working out, are you willing to take those out and maybe take out the 20 previous lines that lead up to it to redo all of that?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of times when I will find myself having to scrap way back and finding the spot where it's where it's working correctly. Or if I find a line that I love, like maybe especially, and again, especially with tightly rhyming poems, and I don't always write rhyming poems anymore. I do write more. I just use rhyme as a tool, but it doesn't really, there are some poems like the ones in that book that are just, really dependent on rhyme. I have a lot of other poems and poetry books that where I spend less time focusing on rhyme. But there are times when if I found exactly the right closing line, because it's so important to end a poem well.
Hmm.
Like sometimes I think that's even more important than just about anything else in the poem. If the poem ends well, if it feels really satisfying, if it closes correctly, that satisfaction is really crucial in a poem. And and there are plenty of times where I'll realize, oh, this is the concluding line right here. And then I'll realize, yeah, but that in order to go there, I'm going to have to back up and I'm going to have to rewrite this and this and this and this because suddenly I've changed meter, for example.
Mm.
Um, yep. But if
I've,
it pays off, if it pays off on the end, then great. That's just fine. It was worth the effort.
mhm. I was watching a few of the videos on your channel, and you talk a lot about the power of revision. So for me, I'm not published yet, right? But I have several little children's books. I have novels that I'm working on too, but I wanted to do the
Nice.
children's
Yeah.
books first because they seem more manageable. I don't know
Sure.
if
Yeah.
that's
Right. Right.
true, but they seemed like it at the beginning.
They probably are. Yeah. Yeah.
But with revision, for me, it just seemed like, oh, I need to make sure that the words do rhyme, that I'm not using weird words, and that the story makes sense and it goes, fast enough, not too fast, but that the pacing's okay. But it sounds like maybe I'm missing the soul of the poem.
Yeah, it's so tricky, Aster. I know, like when I'm working with a lot of, for instance, I just wrapped up a week of school visits, and nearby, a couple hours away, and I was just working with second and third graders, 4 days, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. It was a great week, and we were working on poetry, and I entirely abandoned rhyme. Like I didn't want them to go there because what happens with kids especially is that the rhyme kind of like takes over the poem and they forget all of those other wonderful, the literary tricks that they've got up their sleeve. They stop worrying about telling the story. They stop worrying about word choice. They stop worrying about imagery and all this important stuff because they're just trying to get the rhyme right. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's tricky, and it's one of the things I like about writing non-rhyming poems is that it sometimes serves the poem much better than than when you're trying so hard to make the rhyme work. Then it can be sort of detrimental to the poem. It can end up taking away from what you're really trying to say.
Hmm. Maybe I need to practice doing those then. I just love rhyming words. I
Oh
really
yeah, and
enjoy them a
kids do
lot.
too. Yeah, and kids love rhyming words, and most of my picture books are rhyming picture books. Um, not all of them, but most of them.
Mhm.
And again, when it's done correctly, it really works. But I think I also understand why, sometimes you've probably done some rooting around where you're looking at publishers and publishing opportunities. And when you go and you look at the submission um, criterion for different publishers, there are certain publishers out there that will say, they're looking for picture books, but they do not want rhyming picture books. They'll say in exactly those words,
Hmm.
we are not accepting rhyming picture books. Really, what it comes down to is they don't want like poorly written rhyming picture books.
Mm.
They end up dealing with a lot of manuscripts that come across their desks where either the meter is wrong or the rhymes are slight and they're not really rhyming words, but they're sort of, they're near rhymes. Or the rhymes are just there to service the rhyme, but they're not really servicing the story. And so there are an awful lot of publishers out there who are just simply trying to weed through some of that and are tired of seeing um, rhyming picture books that probably maybe should never have been written in rhyme to begin with, or if they were, they needed to be really torn apart and looked at more carefully and made sure that they're scanning well, you know. And the idea of scanning is just that you probably know this, but the idea of scanning in poetry just means that you're not tripping up. You know, if you're finding yourself hiccuping along the way and you're trying to find the meter again, you know,
Mm.
you're reading through this line and this line, all of a sudden you realize that you're, you know, the syllables are falling into the wrong spots, or you're taking too much effort to get through this line in order to get to this line, or that's all a part of scanning. And for a poem to scan well is pretty critical for children's literature.
Hmm. I'm going to be very interested to see what you say about my poem, because I
Oh,
think
oh
it needs
man,
help.
are you saying like I'm gonna have to be like critical or something? I didn't come on here
Oh
today to
no,
be critical.
I
I
fooled
came on
you.
to just
No.
have a nice just a nice have a nice conversation. I thought we were gonna keep this casual.
It is casual. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. Didn't mean to change the theme here. But I don't know. I want to know what you think. And
Okay.
okay, but first,
Yeah.
can I read one of yours? The pirate dog one?
Sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
so good. It's
Go
so
right ahead.
funny. And when I was reading it to my kids, the accent, like the little pirate accent, just started coming out. And
Right,
so
right.
again, I don't know how you did that, but it's beautiful. And then you have this little dog with fleas all over, and he's so happy. He's got his
Yeah,
little
yeah.
pirate eye patch.
Jim Harris. Yeah, what a
So
guy.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay. Here we go. When you're a pirate dog. When you're a pirate dog, the pirates treat you well, and no one minds your doggy breath or hates your doggy smell, and no one worries if you shed or where you lay your shaggy head, and all the fleas are theirs instead when you're a pirate dog. Does that sound about right?
That's great. That
Oh,
is
good.
absolutely
Okay.
grand. Yes.
Here we
Yes.
go. When you're a pirate dog, they pet you when they're able. They never mind their manners as they feed you from the table. And when they sing a pirate song in jolly voices, loud and strong, you raise your chin and sing along when you're a pirate dog. When you're a pirate dog, your life is free from troubles. They never put you in a tub with smelly soap and bubbles. You spend your days on sea and sand, exploring with your pirate band, and life is sweet and rather grand when you're a pirate dog. That's just so
Brilliant.
great.
That was absolutely
Oh, thanks.
one of the best renditions of that poem I've ever heard.
But they're all like that. They all just slip right out, just so smooth. Whoo.
Oh, good. Good.
Oh,
I'm
they're
glad to hear it.
beautiful. Dun 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 dun. I have a subscribe star now. You can support the channel, get your name in the podcast credits, get little behind the scenes updates with me, and be at the front of the line for interviews. Click on the link below and support the channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the episode. And how did you think of these? Captain Myrtle's turtle boots. Like,
Oh
that's
boy.
so
You know,
funny.
and that one I have to tell you that actually at one point I think was going to be a cowboy poem for a different collection.
Oh.
And that collection never got picked up. And the poem was still sitting around and I still liked the poem. And so it got a little makeover
Mm.
in order to become a pirate poem instead. And I did have a lot of fun with that collection where I was writing. I was watching, you know, old pirate movies like with Errol Flynn and
I love Errol Flynn.
yes, I know. And then I was watching, you know, like you know the Pirates of the Caribbean and those kinds of movies as well. And I'd sit and watch this movie. You know, I was writing down ideas and I went to a pirate museum. I remember there was a pirate museum down in it must have been in Florida. I think it was someplace in Florida, but I don't remember where right off. And you know, and weeding through there, and I'd had a little notepad with me and writing ideas down for yeah. And sometimes it's just like the important thing I tell kids often is finding sort of the little back door into you know into the story. It's daunting to think about wanting to write a poem about pirates, right? As a general theme, like that's a really broad theme.
Mhm.
It's much easier to think about a pirate's boots, It's much easier to think about a pirate's dog than it is to think about pirates in general. And so a lot of times it's the back is sort of, picking up a do I have here, just here,
Oh,
getting a closer look and zooming in a bit rather than trying to take too big of a picture.
mhm. That makes sense. I'd never thought of that. But yeah, it's much more manageable. A little sip instead of dumping it all over your face.
Right, yeah, yeah. It's like the difference between like t teaching kids how to write a poem and telling them that they're going to write a poem about um I'm trying to think like autumn versus saying let's write a poem about samaras, about little maple seeds.
Mm.
There's a huge difference there, to tell it's pretty overwhelming to say write a poem about autumn. Tell them they're going to write about, an autumn leaf, a single autumn leaf, and that's much more manageable.
That makes a lot of sense. I wish you had been one of my teachers. I had great teachers, but I think
Good.
switching gears a little bit.
Yeah.
With this, where did I just put it right here? It's out of print. Can you tell me about that?
It yeah, it is do they officially call it out of print? I think they're not. I think the publisher is referring to it as out of stock with no intention to reprint. And that's sort of their sneaky way of maintaining the control of the title. It's still in their hands as long as they don't call it out of print. In the contract, if it's out of print and it stays out of print for I think like 2 years or something like that, then the rights can revert to the author and to the illustrator, and they can run with it and do what they please. So
That's so
it's
mean. Ah,
yeah, it's you know what though, it's okay, Esther. At the same time, that 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 collection, like that particular title, um did really nicely for me. It I got to take it to a lot of schools. I got to share it with a lot of students. I still share it off and on, even though I have newer books, um but it also keeps me writing. Like I can't just sit back on my laurels. What does that mean anyway? Where does that term come from? Sitting back on your laurels. We're going to have to check the etymology of that. Anyway, maybe you
I don't know
already
if I've
know.
ever
I
heard
don't
that.
I don't know. Anyway, so I can't just sit back and pretend that I can just coast on a book or two, because stuff like that happens. Like there is a lifespan to most books, even that entire gorgeous collection of books behind you, they, titles come and go. They live a life and then they disappear, and that's just sort of the truth of it. And there are very few books that live longer than, even 10 years. I think most books, even traditionally published books from traditional publishers, they live a short life, and if they don't, fly off the shelves, or just, or the publisher wants to make room for new titles and they want to put their energy behind new titles, they don't want to have to put a bunch of stock in their warehouses of stuff that's not moving. That's expensive for them. And so you just sort of celebrate the life that the book had, and you keep moving forward.
Mm,
Or so I tell
okay.
myself.
Uh,
Yeah.
have you traditionally published all of your books?
I have one book that I self-published.
Mm.
It's a collection of do I have it copy? Hold on. Let's see if I've got a bunch of books here next to me. Not that one, just a minute.
Mhm.
Here we go. Okay. Yeah, I self-published this one. This is a collection called An Elephant is Sitting in My Bathtub. And is it backwards to you? Is backwards to me?
It looks good to me.
Okay, okay. And I illustrated this one, and I self-published this one, and it's mostly poems that have seen publication elsewhere.
Mm.
And a lot of them have. A lot of them have turned up in different anthologies and in magazines and things like that. And the nice thing about anthologies and magazines is that those are typically on a contract where if you get a published poem in a collection, it's theirs for like 3 years, and then it reverts back to you. So that tends to be the case. There are some magazines out there that buy poems outright and they keep them forever. And when you sign the contract, you understand that it is now their poem.
Mm.
I don't tend to sign that contract, but they're out there. Um, and so anyway, so yeah, so like this collection, I think the majority of the poems in here have seen publication elsewhere, and it's really hard anymore to find a publisher that wants to do like a paperback collection of kind of middle gradish poems and especially humorous poems, and most of those are on the humorous side. And I do so many school visits that I really wanted and needed a collection for like especially when I'm working with like grades 4, 5, fifth grade students. I don't want to bring to them a book of like Hooray, it's Garbage Day. I'm not,
Mhm.
I'll talk to them about Hooray, it's Garbage Day, or a book like there's a book called Dan the Taxi Man, one of my all-time favorites. And I'll talk with them about that book just because there are things to tell them. I can tell them about where the idea came from. I can tell them about revision. You asked about revision or you commented on
Mhm.
revision. I'll talk with them about revision. I'll talk with them about the perseverance you need to get a book published in the traditional publishing world. So I'll share with them my notebooks. I'll say, well, here's an example of a notebook, and let me show you what my notebook looks like inside, and we can talk about the writing process and the creating process and about editing and revising and all that stuff. So there are things that I can share with them, even if it's a picture book. But I also wanted just a book to be able to say, let me share some poems with you about, here's I'm, yeah. So that's why I chose to self-publish this one,
Mm.
and I'm pretty happy with it. But I don't think I'll do it again. I think it's nice to have that resource at hand.
Mm.
It was fun to do. I don't expect I'll do it again. I might
Mhm.
change my mind in 5 years. Who knows?
Gotcha.
So yeah.
So, where do you get your ideas?
Oh man, I was watching a video on just exactly that question this morning, and I really enjoyed the that person's take on it because the take was basically that sometimes maybe that's the wrong question. Like that the question should have more to do with like because the ideas is not necessarily the tough part, right?
Yeah.
Like getting the idea is not the hard part. The hard part is doing the work. Like the hard part is sitting down and actually getting the words on paper and not getting distracted and Lord knows I get easily distracted. And that's the hard part. That the getting the ideas part is pretty I think pretty straightforward. I think that a lot of times when students ask me that question, I tend to tell them I get my ideas from the same place you get your ideas. I get my ideas from something that I overhear, something that I read, something that I mishear. That happens a lot where I'll think I heard somebody say this, but what they really said was this, and I think, well, that was okay, but and that works. Like the um what else can I tell you? Yeah, I mean, like there are long story like okay, so like Dan the Taxi Man, there's a long story about that, and it just came from the title, and that the title rolled around because my wife was backpacking with a friend of hers, and we live out near the Cascade Mountains and Mount Rainier National Park in that area, gorgeous area. And my wife loves to go backpacking, and she was backpacking with a couple of friends, and they were in about like 3 or 4 days, and one of her friends took a bad step and she broke her leg. Yeah, right, exactly. That's exactly the response I
Oh.
get from kids too. If I ever share this story, they go like this, and yeah, so there they are. They're so they hobbled Deb out of there, and they, divided up all of her backpacking stuff because they were out there for, they're going to be out there about a week. So they got her to the hospital and they took x-rays and said, yeah, Deb, you've got a broken leg. And and then later, because Deb's right leg was broken, of course the situation was she wasn't going to be able to drive anymore. So Deb's husband was going to do all the driving. Deb's husband's name is Dan, and my friend Steve turned to Dan and said, well, I guess that makes you Dan the taxi man. And and I thought, oh, that sounds really cool.
Mhm.
I don't know what it means. I'm not sure what we're going to do with it yet, but I like Dan the taxi man. That's cool. And we were taking like, day hikes and things like that. And while I was hiking, I would stop and I would, and again, I keep little notepads like this in my hip pocket and I'd write down ideas. And eventually I stumbled upon the idea that Dan's job was he's picking up all the musicians in the rock and roll band and getting them to the big rock and roll show, so one at a time he's picking up. Let's see if I can find a good, um, here he's picking up the saxophone player and he's picking up the tambourine player. And eventually they get to the big, to the big show. And, um, here they are arriving at the big show. Um, and all of that just came around because my friend Steve had called Dan the taxi man.
Mhm.
I thought, well, that's cool. What does that mean? I don't know. Figure it out though.
It's worth
So
examining. Have you
yeah.
ever started, you've gotten an idea and you start to write it down, but maybe two, 4 lines in, you're like, there's not enough here.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's just too thin of an idea.
Hmm.
Yeah. Often. And I have, dozens of, half-written stories or stories where I just realize that maybe the concept is pretty good, but I haven't yet figured out how to maintain the story for the duration, that
Hmm.
it's going to either end up with a really saggy middle. I've written like, we were talking about chapter books and I've written chapter books. I've just never had any published. I've never had any accepted for publication. Still working on them, so like I love working on, I'm working on stuff right now that's probably at about a third grade on the Lexile score. And but I'm just struggling to try to find a good publisher for any of those yet. But someday,
Hmm.
next time we get together, I'll be talking with you about my latest chapter book. It'll be
Yeah,
it'll be a good pleasure. Yeah.
that'll be great.
Yep.
See, I thought, and I haven't published anything, but I've watched videos of
Yeah.
YouTubers who have, so I know what I'm talking about. Um,
I watch a lot of good YouTube videos on the writing process and on yeah, absolutely. Anyway, you
but
were saying.
yeah, it seems like, or a lot of them say that once you have a few friends, once you have an agent or a publisher that you've worked with before, that it's easier to get more things published. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. Right, right. And like right now, well, that's one of the struggles I'm having with trying to get published in like middle grade fiction, like third grade fiction is because most of almost well, I take that back. Everything I've had published right now, and I've had like 18 picture books and poetry collections published. So that's a pretty good catalog. You would think that that
Mhm.
would stand for something, but I've never had any like middle grade fiction published. And and the publishers that I'm used to working with, that's not their bag. That's not what they're interested in. And
Right.
so I feel like I'm starting all over again in those areas. And
Mm.
but yeah, the hurdle of just getting something seen is tough once you've had a few connections under your belt. That's huge. I don't have an agent either, and I'm sort of at a point now where I feel like I need to work harder at finding an agent
Mm.
because there's so many publishers who don't want unagented work. Like they're so
Oh.
swamped with manuscripts and unsolicited manuscripts and maybe not even really well constructed manuscripts, and they don't want to be pushing through those anymore. They don't want to have to be, moving through the slush pile, and they just want to know that if it's coming to their desk from an agent, they know that the agent's reputation is on the line and they're supporting that title. So
Well, they're adding a filter. They're adding a
exactly.
cheesecloth with the agent with.
That's right.
Mhm.
Yes, the agent cheesecloth. Yes.
Yeah, I mean that in the most complimentary way
I
possible.
totally get it. I think that
Yeah.
makes absolute sense. And you're right.
Mhm.
That's exactly what happens is you've got the agents are doing the work of sifting through all that stuff and figuring out what is what's worth the publisher's time and what's
Mhm.
not. Yeah. But it seems
Interesting.
like, like if it there's let's see if I can find hang on here. Here. This is a book. Have you seen this one?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so this is the 2024 edition of Book Markets for Children's Writers, and it is fat, and it's mostly, it's publishers, and it's their, it's what they're looking for, what they're not looking for, whether or not they will accept something that is agented or unagented, whether or not they want something that is, whether or not they're accepting poetry, whether or not they're accepting whatever. And there are a couple of different publishers that do this. So this is one. Another one. Hold on.
I had no idea that was a thing.
Here's okay. Here's another one. This one's
Like an
Children's Writers and
illustration.
Illustrators Market.
Ooh.
And the tricky thing is that over the years, because these are great, but over the years, I have found that they actually have fewer and fewer publishers, and there are fewer and fewer publishers in those listings that are accepting unagented work or that are accepting submissions from or multiple submissions or that are accepting work at all. I mean, some of the publishers are just simply saying, nope, we're not accepting manuscripts at all right now. And there are fewer publishers. I think a lot of them are getting, eaten up by some of the larger publishers. And
Mhm.
so it gets tricky. That's
It seems to be becoming more of a monopoly almost.
Yeah, I think so. And I think they're mostly doing still pretty well. Like
Mm.
like my impression is that this children's publishing world is still pretty healthy. Like in general, I feel like there's still good books that are getting put out there and that the publishers are not, they're not flailing around. Most of them
Mhm.
are doing okay from like a bottom line sort of a perspective. But um it's just that they also are flooded. I think AI isn't helping any. I think some of them are getting, manuscripts that somebody is going into, some AI program and say, hey, give me a story about a cat befriending a mouse. Great. Okay, perfect. And they ship it off to some publisher, and that doesn't make their life any easier. So,
Doesn't
yeah.
make our lives any easier either.
No, it sort of sucks to tell you the truth.
Mm.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. That's fascinating. I didn't know that you could go directly to a publisher, and I didn't know that there were books like that. This is all new
Yeah,
information.
yeah, those are the ones. And you have to sort of like stay on top of the most recent release of those
Mm.
because the publishing world, they change hats pretty frequently. And sometimes they just move around from publisher to publisher. Sometimes the who was the assistant editor over here is now is now the executive editor over at this place or whoever was. So they move around. So you have to stay
Mm.
on top of. And still, even with those, there are times when I'll be pushing through those and I'll go, oh, here's a publisher that I haven't reached out to yet, and this could be a good fit for them. And it says that they're accepting manuscripts. And then I go into their website and I look it up on their website. And they say, well, we're sorry, but currently we are not accepting manuscripts. And so even though that, might be a really current edition of that directory, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't still do, due diligence and find
Mhm.
out because it could be that that's a little out of date.
Interesting. Ah, so many hoops to jump through. It's a bit
You're
ridiculous.
not kidding. Yeah, yeah, not kidding.
How much time do you spend compared to writing the book? How much time do you spend getting it published?
Not as much as I should, I think.
Oh.
Like, like right now, I have a few like picture book manuscripts that I'm really happy with, and I haven't been making as strong of a, concerted enough effort to see about actually finding a home for them. Like I'll get them out to a couple of different publishers, and then I sort of forget that they even existed. And next thing I know, I'm looking back through my notes. I keep a file folder, of notes that say, this manuscript is now in this person's hands and this person's hands, and I forget after a while, and suddenly I'm realizing, oh, I haven't sent that manuscript off. It's been 6 months since I last sent that manuscript out, and it's only gone to 4 different publishers, and I should, get off my butt and get it
Mm.
into the hands of somebody else. So
Hmm.
yeah, I'm not nearly as tenacious about that as I could or should be.
Mm. It's a hat I think most writers don't want to wear. Yep. That's a nice one, though. That's a
Thank
nice
you.
hat.
This is my writer's hat. This is the one that tells my wife that I'm writing.
I need one of
And
those.
yeah, no, it's really good because this is the one where if I'm wearing this hat, and she walks in and she sees me wearing this hat, it's supposed to mean I'm in the middle of something. Get back to me when I'm not wearing this hat. So, yeah.
That's brilliant.
Um, yeah, but
Okay,
it's
I'm getting one of those.
yes, yeah. I think I got that one in Peru. So make sure you go to Peru and get that hat.
I'll have to plan a trip.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Peru's a good place to be. So go to Peru.
I've been to Mexico, but not Peru.
Great. Good. Maybe
Um,
they have it in Mexico.
they got lots of things there.
They do. Yeah.
Okay, may I read you my poem?
Yes, of course.
It's
Yeah,
a
I'm glad
bit
you remembered.
long.
Good.
I mean, I wrote it on a trip that we went to, so I was in the car writing it. But I hope it's not boring. But it happened because my son had his blankie, and he's 2, right? So blankie has to come everywhere, and he
Yeah.
wanted to eat breakfast, and I told him, no, honey, blankies don't eat eggs. And it just kind of stuck, and I was like, ooh, that could be good. So
They could.
I wrote
Yeah.
this.
All right.
Blankies don't eat eggs. At least that's what my mama says. Each time she gets our breakfast and pulls aprons over heads. My sister and I cry and fuss and flail our arms about. As happy as we are to eat, it's the perfect time to pout. And again, there's some extra syllables here and there, right?
Oh, not many
You know
though.
what it is,
No,
right?
that's really pretty tight though. That's pretty tight.
Okay. You see, we ran up to our chairs just now with an arm's load of blankies, stuffies, socks, and trains and baby dolls in tow. We know the drill, and yet we just can't seem to stop protest when in our high chairs she declines to let all our things nest. Regardless of our cries and pleas and how we writhe and beg, our mama shakes her head and says, no, blankies don't eat eggs. Then gently but mercilessly, she takes our things one by one and sits them near to watch us eat and says they're having fun. This is why, when Aunt G came to watch us for a day, I made a plan to keep our things with us to eat and play. She looked suspicious for a blink, then smiled and said, that's fine. We cheered and squished all our things in, thinking our aunt sublime. She soon served breakfast, milk and oatmeal and eggs for us to chew. We gobbled up each tasty dish and shared with our friends too. Then, tummies filled and round with chub, we got down from our chairs. It wasn't long before we cried aloud with great despair. Dirty, dirty, yucky, yuck, my sister points and wails. Her dolly's clothes are drenched with milk, as gooey as a snail. Oh no, my choo-choo, I yell too. There's oatmeal in his wheels. And worse, the stuffies are all clumped with remnants of our meal. With tears, I reach for blankie and squish my face into soft silk. Instead, I'm met with cold, wet oats and egg yolk smears and milk. Our Aunt G listens to our sobs, a small frown on her face. There's only one way to fix this and all that mess erase. We carry all our soiled friends to the washing machine. I don't cry, but my sister does, thinking our aunt is mean. She rinses off our treasured pals until they're dripping wet. then pours on soap and shuts the lid when everything is set. We go for walks and play a game and sing some songs and dance, but without our stuffy friends, it's too hard to relax. See that rhyme? I'm like,
Yep. You might have to go back to that one.
mhm. When nap time comes, we sniff and shed a tear or two. We do our best to rest our heads until nap time is through. Then, waking up from lonely cribs, we rush to see our toys. Our Aunt G pulls them from the washer, clean but cold and moist. Okay, that one's a bit, I'm not sure about that one. We wait again and listen to the thump, thump, thump of things, so worried that we nearly missed the chiming doorbell ring. That one's a bit iffy too. I think I was just wanting to get it finished at this point.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
I'm back, my loves, our mama calls. We gasp and cheer and hug, then forget our troubled day by dancing on the rug. We say goodbye to Auntie G, then perk up with a yelp. The dryer buzzes. Hip hooray! Quick, Mom, we say, please help. We hug our toasty stuffies, nearly bouncing round with glee. She wraps us in our blankies, where we stay till 5:30. She calls us up for dinner then. We take our friends along. Before Mama asks a thing, they're put where they belong. She helps us in our high chairs, serves us dinner and jello. All the while, our friends watch and smile to say hello. After dinner, Mom wipes off our faces, hands, and trays. Then, happily, we grab our toys and toddle off to play. The next day, before we eat, we stretch our arms and legs, then push our pals to safety because blankies don't eat eggs.
Nice way of coming around at the end. Yeah. Yeah. Nice job of tucking it in at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Good work.
It's a bit long, maybe. I think some
It
of it could be
is.
taken out.
Yeah, no, it is. You're right. It's a little long, but there's some really good line. And toward the end there, you really have some nice tight stanzas, especially that really worked nicely.
Mm.
But yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But yes, to edit this, I think, well, like I said before, this is the longest poem I've written.
Hmm.
So usually it's like, oh, maybe a page or two. This is like 3 pages handwritten, which I think is too
Right.
much
Yeah.
for a little children's book. Um, maybe. I see your
Yeah.
face looking at me now.
I think you're right. I think because I think it really, really works as a story, as a concept. It absolutely works. And I'm trying to think of where, I think there are different ways that it could be tightened up. I think, for example, it wouldn't have to necessarily. Well, I like the idea of having the auntie come over and that that interruption. I think is good. If you got rid of that, it might help to tighten it up. And then there are other. Um, Yeah, I think there are just some stanzas in there that you could probably go ahead and count as filler
Mm-hmm.
and think that maybe they're not absolutely necessary. I
Mm-hmm.
think there are probably stanzas and a lot of times that I've done that many times where I've written like a 5 stanza poem and I realize that it absolutely holds together as 3 stanzas,
Mm-hmm.
or that I should have ended it, way back here, and this part is really superfluous and would speed things along to just um so yeah, my guess is that you could probably clean it up
Mm-hmm.
pretty quickly and easily, though, if you just decided that you were going to get really harsh with it. And
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think about maybe even a third of it could go.
Hmm. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
probably.
Anyway, okay.
Probably.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, if this were a class and you were
Hmm.
giving homework for how
Yes.
someone such as myself could get better at writing poems and children's books, what would the homework be?
Oh man, what would the homework be? I would say the homework would probably be 2 part. It would be one, to find all that many more poetry collections that really speak to you, that are the kinds of books that are that just feel like the stuff that you would like to be writing, and and just devour those and read them out loud and think about, what is it about this poem that I'm really enjoying, When I got really when I oh, man when I remember when I started, I was really enjoying. Oh, there's that great poem of what's it called? Ella Telefoni, and it's about the elephant who went to use the telephone, and it's so well constructed, and it's funny, and and of course a lot of Shel Silverstein poems, and and Jack Prelutsky poems and all that kinds of stuff. I was reading a lot of those because they were tighter, they were closer to where I thought I wanted to. Right now I'm sort of not going there quite as much anymore. Like I'm tending to write um with, I don't know, I still use a lot of humor, but I'm using more imagery and more fun, kind of surprising metaphor and stuff like that. But anyway, so yeah, definitely finding as much poetry out there and devouring whatever seems to really speak to you, and then recording yourself out loud, and listening back, and handing it off to somebody else, which is always hard to do, like that's always painful, but handing a poem off to somebody else and saying, could you read this out loud to me, and keep a copy of it in front of you while they're going, because you'll catch it right away when they're going, you know how it was supposed to read, you heard it in your head. And if they're reading out loud and all of a sudden they trip on a line, you can look at it and go, well, of course you tripped on that line. It's your first time looking at it, and I need to revisit that line. And
Mm,
that helps a lot. So yeah,
got it.
it's not fine, but finding somebody who is a capable reader. Like I used to use my daughter a lot for that. I would frequently hand, and she's 30 years old now, but at the time, when she was like in middle school, and even high school, I would hand her poems and say, could you read this out loud to me? And that was helpful. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think I will mention that from a like a perspective author end of things, the more you can get yourself out there, and meeting people in the industry, that really helps. Like if you get a chance to go to a writing conference or something like that, where there's going to be an editor that you'd really like to meet, or or an agent that you'd really like to meet, or those kinds of things. That goes a long way toward opening doors,
Okay,
um, whenever possible. Yeah.
thank you so much. And this was so
Yeah.
much fun.
Great. Great. Well, thank you for the invitation.
Okay,
It's
everybody, go buy one of his books because they're amazing and you won't regret it.
Hey, thank you.
And then
All
go
right.
write your own books.
All
Bye
right.
for now.
All right.